Welcome back to more Warhammer lore. In today's video we will be touching on the art of necromancy, specifically its origins, how it differs from normal magic, as well as the ties that bind it to the vampire counts. Well, all vampires actually. As usual, the information for this video is being taken out of the latest army book for the vampire counts and Tomb Kings, as well as lore taken from the Warhammer fantasy novel series. Now, I should also preface this video that many of the topics I will be discussing are not directly written in the army books, but are hinted at and outright stated as fact in the novel series. So if you are a fan of the tabletop game, just know that there may be some discrepancies, and I for my part have done my best in attempting to make a simple, understandable video on a rather complicated topic as accurate as possible. But enough with all this setup, let's get into the meat of the lore, starting with the origins of necromancy. Now, I have covered this a little in my previous Vampire Society video, and I've touched a bit on magic in my Dark Elf Society videos, so this may retread a little ground for those of you that have seen both, and if you haven't, you should definitely check them out. To understand how necromancy came about, you need to understand how magic works in the Warhammer universe. You see, all magic, whether it be cast from a demon to a wizard, or even from a priest, though that they perceive it as a miracle, has its roots in the realms of chaos. Yes, the birthplace of the ruinous powers is the source of all magic in the Warhammer world, but that does not necessarily make it evil. As I said, even the so-called miracles performed by the Priest of Sigmar come from this very source, and they are assuredly not evil. It is better to think of magic as a natural resource in the Warhammer world than a link to some evil entity, as it is no less evil than the water flowing from the ocean or ore mined from the ground. However, it can be used for great evil, and it does tend to lead magic wielders towards a darker path if they are not careful. Now, this could actually be the influence of the Chaos Gods through the magic affecting the wielder, but we will never actually know if this is the magic itself or the deities linked to it that affect the minds of those too weak-willed to resist the call of the ruinous powers. Now, I'm stumbling slightly off topic here, so perhaps one day I will make a proper magic video for Warhammer, but for now, all you need to know is that the winds of magic can be separated into individual aspects, each a foil for another and an embodiment of the elements and natural order of the Warhammer universe. Primarily, there are 8 winds of magic that flow freely over the world. Now, there are also race-specific magics, such as the Lore of Ruin for the Skaven or the Lore of Hashut for the Dawizar, but in my opinion, these are simply a blend of 2 or more winds to make something unique, as it is mentioned that these are the only true winds of magic in the army books. Now, in addition to these 8 winds, there are 2 further lores of magic that utilize great power and are primarily used and developed by the elves. Of course, I am talking about the lore of high and dark magic. In the case of high magic, this was actually taught to the elves by the lizardmen, or possibly even the old ones themselves. This lore of magic allows a mage to harness all the nearby winds, regardless of how weak or strong a certain wind is around themselves at this time, and combine them into something much more powerful than its individual parts. In the same vein, the lore we are more concerned with is the lore of dark magic. This was in fact invented by Morathi, though it is alluded to that the knowledge of how to master this magic may in fact have been negotiated with demons of the ruinous powers, but essentially what Morathi and now countless other dark elves and select humans do when harnessing the winds of Dar is forcing the winds of magic to bend to your will through sheer determination. You see, unlike high magic where the winds are teased and pulled to mess together, when someone summons the wind of Dar, you are actually crushing and forcing all nearby magic by will alone to compress together, which creates a lore that at its heart is very evil and malicious, but very, very potent. It should also be mentioned that dark magic can naturally occur in the Warhammer universe through the emotions of people, through, for instance, a rather bloody battlefield, or a bunch of people that have been tortured over time. Generations of people, in fact, will leave a stain of dark magic on the land and actually will turn it into a focal point for power, for specifically for dark magic as opposed to the other forms of magic. And now that we have an understanding of dark magic, we can delve into the discover of necromancy through the Lich King himself, Nagash, the usurper of Khemri. Now, after Nagash's father was murdered by unnatural means, the former Grand Hierophant of the Mortuary cult came into the possession of Dark Elf captives. These beings were stranded in Khemri by unfortunate events, where after a great storm, the Druchii found themselves stranded and taken captive by the local human savages. Being heavily outnumbered and threatened with death, the Dark Elves smote the former king of Khemri during battle and were sold as hostages to the same city as sacrifices to inter the same king they helped lie low. Nagash, seeing these creatures as the very same ones that murdered his father, saved them from their original fate. Though it was not out of some goodness of his heart, he essentially forced the Druchii to teach him magic. At this time, the only magic known to the Nehekaran people was that of the miracles of their gods, and perhaps the Wind of Death, though their in-depth study into the subject may have revealed some of the Wind of Saish. The magic of the Druchii, however, was much more potent, as it was in fact the Wind of Dar, or dark magic, and slowly over time, Nagash learned how to wield this great power. He was in fact the very first human to ever harness this dark magic, and it seems to have had a pronounced effect upon his soul, or what remained of it, as through his knowledge as the Grand Hierophant and the lore of dark magic, Nagash, much to the shock of the Druchii, managed to create something unique and much more powerful beyond what they had expected from a mere human. He managed to create an elixir of life by harvesting the life essences of human sacrifices and taking it into himself, giving him increased physical strength and speed as well as vitality, which essentially made him immortal. Of course, once the Druchii's use had run its course, they were disposed of in a most grisly manner, and this new lore of magic was slowly dispersed through the followers of Nagash. Now, if you have seen my Tomb King videos, you will know that Nagash usurped the throne from his brother and reigned as the King of Kings over Nehekara for a long and brutal reign until the various priest kings banded together to cast him from the throne. During this time, Nagash had built his great black pyramid, the design and placement of which acts as almost a focal point of dark magic and a container or storage unit of pure chaotic energies. Through the construction of this pyramid, Nagash attained untold power and insight into the winds of magic he had not achieved before. Of course, this came at the cost of the lives of his subjects, and ultimately he had very few men left in his army to repel the rebel priest kings. Though Nagash was powerful, he knew that he could not single-handedly take on the entirety of Nehekara, and so he decided to make a new army. Through his studies and use of dark magic, he invoked the first of necromancy, ever used by mortal men. Similar to how dark magic is the compression of various winds molded into malevolent power, necromancy at its heart is the manipulation and bastardization of Shaish, the Wind of Death. I know that the Wind of Death sounds like an evil magic, but it actually is not inherently evil. It is the foil to the Wind of Life, for all living things must one day die, and so it is neither good nor evil, in much of the same way that fire is both destructive and necessary for life to flourish. However, necromancy utilizes dark magic to twist this very wind into an abomination of undeath. With this magic, Nagash was able to funnel his dark energies and will into the empty vessels of the dead, and reanimate them with unlife bound to do his bidding. And this is where we can see the divergence between the form of necromancy utilized by the vampires and common necromancers, and that of the lich priests of the Tomb Kings. Despite their similarities, the form of necromancy used by Nagash is simply an extension of his will. Really not much different than your average spell, slightly more complicated and certainly more dark in nature, but common in its use. This is what the vast amounts of zombies and skeletons as well as simple beasts are animated with in the Vampire Count roster. However, there is a further form of necromancy Nagash used to actually bind souls that have passed back into their bodies. This is much more taxing on the spellcaster, but the result is a much more formidable fighter that is somewhat capable of thinking on a rudimentary level independently from its caster. You see, a zombie requires specific instructions on what it should be doing at all times, or else it will simply stand there doing nothing. It has to be told to walk and to attack the living, and even how it should be attacking the living. Whereas a wight, or the dead that make up the Grave Guard and Black Knights of the Vampire Counts, are given instructions which they carry out until given another order. However, they do not need to be instructed on how to fight, as they retain some of their soul infused with dark necromantic power to allow their experiences in life to guide their attacks. This makes them deadly opponents, as with unlife comes unlimited stamina and usually increased strength, taking an average knight in life and turning him into an instrument of destruction in undeath. For the dead do not tire, and the dead take no prisoners. Now, this aspect of necromancy is very similar to the Tomb King's way of resurrecting their dead, but the biggest difference is that the Lich Priests essentially do this through a kind of miracle, or spell that invoke the Nehekaran god of the underworld, Usirian. They commune with their god, and he allows the souls of the long-dead warriors of Nehekara to leave the realm of souls, the Tomb King afterlife, and inhabit their bodies. This has much of the same effect as binding a soul to your will through the Vampire Count's necromancy, but the souls of the Tomb Kings are willingly inhabiting their bodies, which appears to make them much more deadly opponents, as they often retain more of their memories and therefore skill than the average Grave Guard. This is why the Tomb Kings are able to summon undead that can perform complex tasks, such as firing a catapult or using a bow and arrow. While technically the Vampire Counts could do the same, because Nagash actually did this, but it requires a great deal of power and will to keep so many complex tasks running efficiently, especially during a battle, whereas the Lich Priests of the Tomb Kings are exerting the same amount of effort to raise a skeletal spearman as they are an archer or even tomb guard. Now, another aspect of necromancy I haven't yet touched on is that it is a much more fluid lore than many other lores of magic, including the lore of Nehekara. You see, the art of necromancy, when wielded by an experienced and powerful user, can be used to not only bring to life the long dead, but also to create constructs of bone and sinew from other various parts and pieces into something much more powerful. Nagash did just this when laying siege to Maharak before his defeat. He used the bones of various animals and humans to construct hulking giants, massive scorpions, and other creatures of his imagination to animate the raw material of death to his whims and attack the living. In this way, not only can constructs be made, but nearly anything. It is not uncommon for necromancers to make palanquins of human bones that walk themselves, or construct a bridge of undeath to allow an undead army to cross where an enemy believed themselves safe. Essentially, the limit of what can and cannot be done through necromancy is only limited through the power and imagination of the caster. Theoretically, anything can be made and given life to savage one's enemies, but there is also a great price that is doled out on those who steep themselves in dark magic. Even when utilizing a normal wind of magic, there is a risk associated with summoning too much power than you can handle. As I said earlier, the winds of magic all come from the realms of chaos, and similarly, when gathered in great quantities, they can grow out of control and have unintended side effects. For instance, a wizard of the Bright College or fire magic could pull too much of the wind of Akshay, and instead of his fireball immolating the enemy, it might burn his body to a crisp, reducing the caster to ashes. This obviously was not the intended effect, but a risk that runs with all magic. Of course, the risk can be even more serious when dealing with dark magic, as it often has a tendency of not only possibly killing the wielder, but more often than not turning the caster into an uncontrolled mutating beast, essentially a chaos spawn. This is what happens to those too inexperienced or foolish to call upon powers that they cannot handle. However, the lore of necromancy also has a further, more subtle effect that takes time and for the most part is always going to happen to a wielder of this dark magic. You see, much like the creator of this lore, necromancy seems to twist the ideals and humanity of those that wield it, molding them into truly malevolent beings and inspiring paranoia and lust for more power. Now, this may be true of other magics as well, but the effect of this on a necromancer appears to be much more potent, as the dark magics they take into their body often change their appearance. Slowly at first, they take on the forms of weak old things on the verge of death, despite the necromantic energy strengthening their bodies far beyond what a normal man is capable of. Indeed, the use of necromancy almost forms an addiction where the caster must steep themselves in dark magic and always strive for more power. Some necromancers can even sustain themselves off of the wind alone and forgo the needs of the flesh for a time, utilizing dark magic to breathe a kind of almost unlife into them. And now would be a good time to segue over and let's talk about vampires and how they are tied to necromancy. As I believe most of you have seen in my previous video on vampires in the Warhammer world, they are beings of dark magic. A pseudo form of necromancy was essentially cast upon them, and now they are beings of magic with an indomitable will of their own. Since they are beings of dark magic, they exude this around their presence. It's a presence of rawness, a taint upon the wind of death. In fact, this is actually one of the ways a sorcerer can track a vampire, as the foul necromancy that keeps them living is an affront to this wind, and it lingers where they congregate and have been. Also, for this reason, many vampires, despite not being magically adept in life, are capable of harnessing and learning to use the winds of magic. This often takes on the form of dark magic or winds close to death, such as the actual wind of death or the lore of shadows, and of course necromancy. And in fact, it often becomes an innate ability to some of the vampire bloodlines. The Necrarch bloodline is completely steeped in magic, and they are amongst the most powerful sorcerers and casters in the Warhammer world, rivaled by something like the Slann or the High Elves. But others, such as the von Karsteins, are quite adept at necromancy in their own right. But the most imperative of this ability is the fearsome Strigoi, whom out of some instinct are able to not only summon ghouls, but are able to resurrect and mount terrorgeists. This is rather impressive, as Strigoi are essentially feral, but yet through some instinct they can manage to resurrect and bind one of the most powerful monsters in the Vampire Count army to their will. It just shows you that magic and necromancy are very tied into what makes up a vampire and what they are capable of. Now, with that said, it is also true that many vampires can not only not utilize necromancy, but they are completely incapable of utilizing the winds of magic outside of their latent vampiric gifts. The most famous example is Conrad von Karstein, the second son of Vlad, whom was inept when it came to magic. He did make up for this in his brutality and combat prowess, but he had to rely on others to raise his armies. This is where normal human necromancers come into play. You see, even though many vampires are capable of raising armies of the dead, often they choose to not take the entire load upon themselves, so that they can focus more upon the slaughter of the mortal, or cattle as they would like to call them, and even partake in this orgy of blood with their own two hands. For this reason, they employ human necromancers to keep pieces of their army moving and independent of themselves. This also prevents the battle from being won by simply taking out a single caster. Now, you might be wondering why a regular human necromancer would be following a vampire, and the reason is much more simple than you would think. You see, vampires are beings of dark magic and often have lived well beyond the years of a normal man, and usually they have access to knowledge that would take an average human several lifetimes to accumulate. So, put simply, often necromancers will seek out vampires in hopes of offering their services in exchange for access to their libraries and forbidden tomes of knowledge. This is even more true of a vampire that is obviously a master of the dark arts, as often they will take on human pupils who will hope that through their service will be allowed to not only study this knowledge, but hopefully be turned through the blood kiss into a being of dark magic themselves, as often a vampire's access to dark magic and therefore necromancy far outstripes that of a mortal man. Now, this is not only always the case, but for some reason, something about their undead bodies allows them to draw in more power than an average human. Now, one aspect of necromancy I have not covered yet is that it can also be used to summon and bind souls to the mortal realm. These are essentially ghosts whose malignancy of being denied the peace of the afterlife makes them very effective against the living. They often come in the form of wraiths or banshees and can be just as powerful as any dead reanimated corpse. Now, these were also used by Vlad von Karstein to siege and ultimately destroy Middenheim, the great capital of Middenland, which is said to have never been breached before then. This is also a favorite torture method of necromancers of their victims, as they will not allow those that they kill to move on from this world, not only force their bodies to toil for their aspirations, but force their very soul to serve them for all eternity without any hope of peace. In this vein, we should cover what would drive a normal man to even become a necromancer in the first place, as they are definitely devoid of much of their humanity. As far as I know, there are no practitioners of necromancy other than that of mankind. That does not mean that the elder races are not capable of it, because I would think that both Marathi and Malekith could do this easily, but that they choose not to, or deign it as a lower form of magic not worth mastering, as it was in fact invented by a lowly man, if you can even call Nagash a man anymore. The reason this is important is that, as we have covered, when one draws in the necessary winds to perform necromancy, it will strip you of your humanity. It severs it from your soul, and you are essentially damning yourself to eternal torment should you ever die, as regardless of your faith, no god of death takes kindly to cheating them of their prize. To put it simply, necromancers are made through circumstance. They are either men seeking knowledge for knowledge's sake, a curiosity that could also lead you down the path to the ruinous powers, or they are desperate men either trying to save loved ones from death's embrace, or are trying to protect themselves and their family from possible harm. A necromancer that comes to mind is the disgraced priest of Mor, the god of death in the Empire, during the Black Plague, unleashed by the Skaven, whom lost his faith and, in an attempt to save his family, called upon the winds of necromancy, damning his eternal soul, and forging a considerable undead empire in Sylvania long before Vlad von Karstein and the vampires would rule it. As you can see, through fate, or perhaps the whims of the ruinous powers even, a priest was brought low and through desperation became an abhorrence to his god, and eventually led the undead against other men and even some Skaven, though it wasn't out of love for his fellow man. As much in the same way one can become immune to the savageries of war when constantly forced to kill people, when one raises the dead, one ceases to see them as humans. You start to see them as tools, as inanimate objects to bow to your every whim. And for that reason, necromancy is one of the most deplorable and ultimately destructive winds of magic that any human can attempt to master. In a way, it is very similar to those that fall to chaos. It is a complete damnation of one's soul, the only hope being to try to not die, to either be uplifted by a vampire, or in the case of the ruinous powers, become a demon through the grace of your chosen deity. And with that, we are ending our lore video on necromancy in the Warhammer world. Now, I do make mistakes from time to time, and if I have gotten something wrong, or you would like a few more answers on this topic, feel free to leave them in the comments section, and I will do my best to either answer them in another video, or include the missing content in one of my follow-up videos. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching, especially if you have made it this far into the video. Now, if you are in fact new to the channel, it does help me out if you both like this video and subscribe to the channel. This will keep you in touch with content I upload and get the word out to other people who might be interested in this subject. Also, recently it has come to my attention that people are being unsubscribed and not seeing content being uploaded, and the remedy for this is to click on the little bell next to the subscribe icon to notify you through a message every time I upload content. It can be a little annoying, I know, but it's the only fix I've been able to come with or seen come up with until YouTube fixes the problems with their algorithm currently. Now, with that out of the way, I do hope you have learned something today, or at least found this interesting, and there is much more lore to come for the vampires. As always, I have been Jumbo Thick. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Have a good day.